Good evening, you're tuning to VTV News Live. I'm Michael Liu, and here comes the latest headlines for this hour. Vietnamese Prime Minister highlights ties with Algeria, showing determination to boost cooperation. Vietnam and Russia SMEs ties bolstered. Vietnam to step up disaster mitigation efforts, discussing measures to prevent risk. Now, first off, Vietnamese Prime Minister Nguyen Tan Dung stated with Algerian President Abdelaziz Bouteflika at a meeting on Monday that the Vietnamese government and people wish to consolidate the traditional relationship with Algeria as a priority in the nation's foreign policy.
Briefing President Bouteflika on outcomes of talks with Algerian Prime Minister, the Vietnamese leader said both sides extensively discussed issues of mutual concern, especially on ways to deepen cooperation. Prime Minister Dung hoped the Algerian government would create favorable conditions for PetroVietnam to extend exploration and production into Algeria's Bouteflika oil field. He further added that Vietnam was willing to create favorable conditions for Algerian businesses to invest in Vietnam. President Bouteflika said both nations should keep nurturing their traditional ties. He highly valued the outcomes of talks between the two prime ministers, especially the agreement on tightening links in politics, economics, culture, education and defense. On the same day, Prime Minister Nguyen Tan Dung received the head of the Algeria-Vietnam Parliamentary Friendship Group, Malum Hossein, and chairman of Algeria-Vietnam Friendship Association and Vietnam-Vietnam Federation in Algeria.
Now, Vietnamese Prime Minister Nguyen Tan Dung stated with Algerian Abdelaziz Bouteflika. I would like to move on to some other news. Now, Prime Minister Dung and his Algerian counterpart Abdelmalek Selfa also visited the headquarters of Algeria's Sonatrach Petroleum Corporation. Sonatrach is currently in partnership with PetroVietnam on a joint oil exploration project. This is the first project between Vietnam and Algeria and boasts a total investment capital of $1.2 billion. The project will begin extracting commercial oil flows from the Bouteflika and MOM oil fields from July this year. With ever-growing demand now casting a burden on the country's energy resources, Vietnam is now looking abroad for oil and gas, with investment in Algerian oil now deemed as one of the most successful overseas projects of the Vietnam National Oil and Gas Group.
PetroVietnam has been able to find oil in the Bouteflika and MOM oil fields after 12 years of drilling in the Sahara Desert. The PetroVietnam Exploration and Production Corporation, or PVEV, under the PetroVietnam, is now on the very last steps to put the Bouteflika oil well into operation. The 15 oil wells will boast about 1 billion barrel capacity, well beyond the corporation expectations.
After a rigorous exploration period, we have been able to exploit the oil here. We think there's a 20,000 barrel a day reserve, which offers massive commercial potential.
PVEV now holds a 40% stake in the Bouteflika joint venture with Thailand and Algeria partners. Revenue is expected to top $100 million for the first year, double from the third year onwards. The initial investment will be recouped within 6 years, while the project will run for about 25 years. This is just one of the 20 overseas projects of PetroVietnam in 13 countries worldwide.
Looking for resources overseas is our long-term strategy to ensure energy security. Exploring oil and gas overseas will help us to become a multinational corporation and prepare us for future international integration.
Many leading nations in oil exploitation have given in to the extreme conditions presented by working in this desert. PetroVietnam's success in prospecting oil in Algeria has opened up an opportunity for overseas energy investment while bringing Vietnam one step closer to advancing in a tough business.
Swiss Foreign Minister Didier Bockholter is in Hanoi for an official visit at the invitation of Vietnamese Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Pham Binh Minh. During talks on Tuesday, Bockholter said that his country desired more effective and stronger cooperation with Vietnam. The two sides agreed to increase visits, continue to implement political dialogue between foreign ministries and coordinate activities to celebrate the 45 years of diplomatic relations in 2016. They also agreed to boost negotiations for an FTA between Vietnam and the European Free Trade Area, which will expand business links between the two countries. Earlier in the same day, Deputy Prime Minister Hoàng Trung Hải welcomed Switzerland's decision to open a consulate general in Ho Chi Minh City. Deputy Prime Minister Hai suggested Switzerland promote trade and accelerate the implementation of ODA and FDI projects in Vietnam and the negotiation on free trade agreements between Vietnam and the European Free Trade Association. For his part, Bockholter confirms that his nation's desire to improve links with Vietnam is real, describing the opening of the Swiss Consulate General in Ho Chi Minh City as a testament to this increased level of engagement, particularly at a time where Switzerland is reducing the number of its diplomatic agencies abroad. Vietnam and Russia aim to boost two-way trade turnover to $10 billion by 2020. To reach this goal, links between small and medium-sized enterprises from both countries is expected to be further strengthened. As part of these efforts, trade promotion programs have been held on a move of frequent basis in both countries. The following report takes a look.
The number of trade fairs between the Vietnamese and Russian businesses like this has significantly increased in recent times. Events like this give firms from both countries more chances to scope out potential partners and business opportunities.
Vietnam is potentially on the threshold of breakthrough. We also find it easy to work with the small and medium-sized companies in Vietnam, as they have Russian-speaking staff. Vietnam's SMEs are lacking capital, which is stunting their growth, so investment from Russian companies would be beneficial.
However, there currently are limited conditions for the cooperation.
Russian businesses are paying a lot of attention to Vietnam. However, they are just looking for the chance to invest, as they know little else about business environment. In addition, they also need to build good relations with Vietnamese enterprises, but that isn't easy.
This is a meeting between Russian business from the Russian city of Novosibirsk and their Vietnamese partner. Sergei Ivanov is director of Novosibirsk City SME Assistance Fund. He often works closely with his Vietnamese counterparts to arrange meetings like this.
We often arrange meetings for firms from the two countries as well as exhibitions to introduce our city's products. Before visits by our city's firm to Vietnam, we often contact Vietnam businesses in advance and inform Vietnamese enterprises of what our firms are interested in, so we can set up more useful meetings. We targeted Vietnam ages ago, but we only met Vietnamese businesses within the last 6 months, and today we have signed our first ever cooperation agreement with a Vietnamese company.
Experts claim that it isn't easy for businesses to enter new markets, but over the past few years, the number of trade promotion activities between the firms from the two countries has risen significantly in both Russia and Vietnam, indicating closer ties in the future.
A cooperation agreement between the Japanese Committee on Study of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries Strategies and Vietnam's Ministry of Science and Technology was signed on Tuesday in Hanoi. One of the important commitments were helping Haizong, Guangning, Bắc Giang provinces export 1,000 tons of lychees to 6 foreign markets in 2015. Japan has also committed itself to helping farmers in these provinces in planting, harvesting, storage, processing and export using high-tech applications. Also, on the same day, the Japanese committee signed another cooperation agreement with the Vietnam Academy of Science and Technology. The agreement focuses on the use of high-tech applications in developing agriculture, forestry and fisheries industries, as well as helping Vietnam mitigate the impact of climate change in the years to come. Now, the restructuring of Vietnam's commercial banks has received attention from foreign investors and financial institutions. To get more foreign partners, insiders have proposed to lift the current 30% cap on foreign ownership in Vietnamese banks.
In 2014, the Saigon Commercial Bank, or SCB, sold over 13% of its charter capital for $87 million to 2 institutional investors from the UK. Before that, SCB had sold over $520 million in bad debt to the Vietnam Asset Management Company, or VAMC. The financial restructuring brought positive changes to the bank.
Vietnamese commercial banks cater mostly for the domestic market. They play an important part in supporting domestic enterprises in their growth. The participation of foreign investors would strengthen these efforts and have raised the quality of Vietnamese financial institutions.
Vietnamese banks also hope to benefit from the management systems and know-how of foreign investors. They also expect foreign partners to be more involved in bad debt deals.
Foreign investors would help bring more transparency in the banking sector's restructuring. The selling and buying of bad debt would have to strictly follow market rules. In that process, foreign investors would assume the task of asset valuation.
However, some experts say that most of the better performing banks have reached the 30% limit of foreign ownership, while at the same time many strategic investors have proved skeptical about buying minority stakes.
The question is, what does Vietnam need and want? If Vietnam wants to attract foreign strategic investors, the 30% cap on foreign ownership needs to be raised.
However, many Vietnamese banks have sold only 10 to 50% of their shares and are reluctant to sell higher stakes to foreign investors, citing fears of losing control. Meanwhile, a number of foreign banks have requested that the State Bank of Vietnam provides a clear roadmap for raising foreign ownership in Vietnamese banks.
Still to come on VTV News, Vietnam to step up disaster mitigation efforts, discussing measures to prevent risks. Persian literature promotes Iranian and Vietnamese cultural ties. Stay tuned, for we'll be right back after the break with more stories.
Exotic Vietnam is an intriguing blend of many charms. This land is where all manner of stunning landscapes await like a visual feast, rivaled only by the beauty of its people and their abundantly rich tradition and culture. Here is where you can relive the past in richest color or live it up in the bright lights of the big city. With so much more to offer, Vietnam is simply unforgettable.
Welcome back to VTV News. Now, the Middle East respiratory syndrome, otherwise called MERS-CoV, has a high chance of entering Vietnam. This was affirmed by the Ministry of Health at a recent meeting of the Steering Committee on Preventing MERS-CoV. MERS-CoV is a viral respiratory illness that is caused by coronavirus and was first reported in Saudi Arabia in 2012. Those who are in contact with camels or bats can be easily infected with the virus. According to the World Health Organization, otherwise called WHO, the fatality rate is 40% and it is hard to detect the virus as the symptoms are similar to other regular respiratory diseases. No vaccine is available so far. At the moment, Vietnam has not recorded an MERS-CoV case yet. The Ministry of Health has issued guidelines and other diagnosis instructions for the virus. Reports show that since the beginning of the year, about 23,000 workers has returned from 9 Middle East countries that are believed to contain the virus. Moving on to some other news. Vietnam has put forward a plan to mitigate disaster risks for the 2016 to 2030 period in a conference held yesterday in Hanoi. The event, introducing the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, was jointly held by the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development and the UNDP. VTV reporter Thanh Tung has more.
Before the Sendai Framework was born, Vietnam had implemented the Hyogo Framework of the United Nations since 2005 to build capacity in responding to natural disasters. Since then, the country has achieved promising results, especially in lowering the death toll.
From 2005 to 2010, fatalities from disasters are about 400 to 500 per year. But from 2010 to 2015, death toll remains under 150 each year.
After 10 years implementing the Hyogo Framework, 187 UN members adopted the Sendai Framework, a new blueprint for disaster risk reduction last March in Japan. According to the 15-year framework, cooperation in science and technology is a key factor in disaster risk reduction. This is also a key element in Vietnam's strategy in response to disaster risk.
We have limitations in disaster forecasting. Therefore, we need to apply space technology, as well as share modern technology with other nations to improve our forecasting capacity.
In addition to disaster forecasting, international experts also recommended that Vietnam should further the involvement of locals in risk assessment to develop a disaster response plan.
Vietnam needs to invest more in an existing Program 1002 on community-based disaster risk management in 6,000 communities in Vietnam. Discuss with them to analyze the risk together and decide what sort of actions are needed. Women and men, but also children, can be involved.
According to the Global Assessment Report on Disaster Risk Reduction, the expected average annual losses from earthquakes, tsunami, tropical cyclones and river flooding are now estimated at $314 billion in the built environment alone. Therefore, investment in disaster risk reduction and management is considered essential to sustainable development in the context of climate change.
Persia was once seen as a country where people walked on silk carpets and spoke the language of poetry. While Persian poetry has not found a popularity in Vietnam, so far new efforts are being made to promote and introduce the best of Persian and modern Iranian literature to the country. We'll look at more in the following report.
The sons of Adam are limbs of each other, having been created of one essence. When the calamity of time affects one limb, the other limbs cannot remain at rest. If you have no sympathy for the troubles of others, you are unworthy to be called by the name of a human. This line of Sadi Shirazi, a major poet from the 18th century Persian Empire, were inscribed at the entrance of United Nations headquarters in New York. In Vietnam, his works has been introduced in a special edition of a literary journal. Simple yet profound, experts believe that Sadi's poem and Persian literature bear some similarities with Vietnamese literature.
Iranian literature has many things in common with Vietnamese traditional literature. This affinity appears in folklore and others. They are close in the sense that literature is related to social and intellectual life. Famous Iranian authors share similar philosophy with Vietnamese big names like Trần Nhân Tông, Nguyễn Trãi or Nguyễn Du.
Introducing Saadi's poem is just the very first step of promoting Persian literature and cultural exchanges between Vietnam and Iran.
Introducing Persian literature will help bolster cultural ties between Vietnam and Iran as well as mutual understanding of people from the two nations. This is a long process and there are many things to do to strengthen bilateral ties.
Language now remains as the biggest barrier between the two cultures. Enhancing education, cooperation and language training will be a good start for bringing two countries closer in the coming time.
Only a few people in Vietnam speak Persian and only a few Iranians know Vietnamese. Therefore, language training is very important. Recently, the two countries have signed a cultural cooperation agreement. Student exchange and mutual visits by cultural delegations will be boosted.
Introducing Saadi's works to Vietnamese audiences is just part of the ongoing efforts to promote Iranian culture in Vietnam, helping alleviate cross-cultural understanding between the two countries.
Now, just before we say goodbye, let's take a look at the latest weather update of selected cities around the world. That's it for this edition of VTV News. Simply log on to vtv4.vn or youtube.com/vtv4go for updated content. Goodbye and see you in the next bulletin of the day.